So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Essie Mary, and I'm with the Global Fund for Community Foundations. In this morning or afternoon's call, I also have two of my colleagues, Wendy and Ashburn, who are here with me, perhaps helping with sort of the background technical issues. But if you know them or don't know them, maybe you can put on your camera and just wave so that at least they can see your face and just know who you are. There's Wendy. You can see Ashman, but he's somewhere in a hoodie in this room as well. And there he is. In case you've wandered into the wrong Zoom room, do what conversation we're about to have right now, which is a conversation about how change happens. Having a very specific decolonized perspective that can transform or that can inform transformative funding practices, particularly with donors and NGOs. So let me just give you a little bit of context and background to how we came to this conversation and to the Shift to Power Fellowship. And the idea for the fellowship is really, if I think about the journey, it's a 3-year journey actually, but it started with a question. And that question was, how can we discuss and reflect around issues of power to create space for connecting, bridging, and bonding, and to deepen and expand the Shift to Power movement in terms of both social and relational capital? And how can we strengthen or build a collective weave between change makers all over the world? This question really came out of a previous work we had done in 2021, which was working with many of our partners and allies in the Shift to Power global movement to map relationships and interconnections, particularly between Global South organizations on the Shift to Power Pando map. This was an exercise for us to attempt to see the value of strengthening connections between different parts of the ecosystem, in a way, creating a bigger us or a bigger sense of us, if you will. So in 2022, the call for the fellowship was pretty simple. We were looking for individuals who were already engaged in immersion practice. This is what we are referring to as community philanthropy, or using participatory processes in their everyday work, and who were also curious to understand more about change and to connect with other like-minded peers and change makers around the world who they can informally connect with and learn from. I'm in my screen, so I was trying to. This is a look back at the second cohort of the Shift to Power Fellowship that began in September last year. There were 20 fellows in the second cohort representing 13 countries. And this afternoon's call, we are going to hear specific authors, but most of them are also in the room with us as well. I should have mentioned this perhaps in the beginning, but we do have interpretation services for this call today. It's different from the one we had this morning. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there might be a button that says more or 3 dots. And then if you click on it and go to the interpretation, there's like a little globe symbol or icon. Once you click on interpretation, you can just click on the room. We have interpretation in Spanish and in Portuguese. So you can select the room that you want to. If staying in English, you just stay in the main room. So that's just a bit of technicality there. So this afternoon's call, really, we're gonna have 3 of our fellows. Diane from Brazil, Shelley from Zimbabwe, and Angela from Colombia talk a little bit about their insights, their learnings, what the past 10 months of their fellowship has felt like or has been like, and what they've worked on. Diane will be speaking about community engagement strategies in Brazil. Shelley will be speaking about advocacy for Shelley will be speaking on advocacy for enabling frameworks for community philanthropy or community foundations, specifically using insights from Zimbabwe. And Angela will be speaking on alternative organizational structures and architecture using experiences from Colombia. Just wanted them to, if you haven't already turned on video for our fellow speakers, could you just turn them on and just wave so that I know who you are? I see Diane already. I thought I saw Shelley. There we are, Shelley. And then where is Angela? I don't see you. Oh, there you are. Just wave, Angela, so that we can see you. I know that you're here. There you are. Great, great. So that's it, really. Let me just talk a little bit about the process for today. I'm going to shut up very soon because you guys didn't come here to hear me talk. You came here to hear the fellows speak specifically. But we'll spend the next maybe 4 minutes hearing from each of the fellows for about 10 minutes each, 12 minutes. And then we will break out or the issues raised or topics raised by the fellows. And then we'll reconvene back in the main plenary room for any last words and or questions you may have, either to the fellows particularly or about the fellowship, the Global Fund, or the fellowship to me and to my colleagues here as well. I hope that is okay. So I don't know who wants to start first or whose camera open immediately. Right next to me in the Rolodex in Zoom, Ali. So maybe with you, and you can just introduce yourself and just write in. While exercise I'd asked in the beginning is, if you haven't already done so, just type your name and country, where you're calling in from. So we just have an idea of who else is in the room with us. But Shelley, you have the microphone. You are mute.
Oh, thank you so much. I keep getting muted. Okay, can I switch off my camera because my bandwidth is acting up?
That's fine.
Okay, my name is Shelley Satuku from Zimbabwe. I'm with the organization Civio Institute, which is a Pan-African think tank working on policy advocacy, and I am mostly working around community philanthropy and communities. And it's such a bittersweet moment, thanks to Global Fund for Community Foundations. We had an exciting journey the past months, and I'm so grateful for the interactions that I had with fellows. And I think we managed to build lasting relationships, I believe. So today I'm just going to talk about advocating for an enabling environment for community philanthropy. So one of the things that I'm mostly grateful for this fellowship is that it really worked well with what I was already doing at Civio, and it made perfect sense to be talking about Shift the Power, decolonizing philanthropy, because that's what we also work in as much as we didn't really use the words shift the power, but in action, what we've been doing is actually shifting power. We work with community foundations that work with grassroots, and we help empower community foundations to advance community philanthropy and also strengthen their structures. So one of the things that we worked on was a study on regulatory frameworks for philanthropy, where we were looking at laws and policies that either promote or inhibit philanthropy in 10 SADC countries. So from our learnings and previous studies on community foundations, we had an appreciation that community philanthropy plays a pivotal role in advancing social change and addressing systemic issues in society. But also, we then learned that it is important for us to have that appreciation of the players, the major players in community philanthropy, and for example, communities and community foundations, but also to understand the factors that inhibit and promote the growth of community philanthropy. In our studies and our interaction with community foundations, we then understood that they are always at the forefront of responding to crisis within communities. Before we even talk about government stepping in, before we even talk about humanitarian aid stepping in, we see community philanthropy and community foundations stepping in first. But we also understand that there are so many factors that may hinder their work, and most of the regulatory frameworks that affect the civil society, the broader civil society, tend to affect community foundations. We looked at a 10-country study when we're looking at our study in regulatory frameworks for philanthropy. And we noted that there were laws to do with movement of financial resources, for example, in a bid to try to curb terrorism and money laundering. But we also see that these frameworks tend to sort of like slow down movement of money towards community foundations to advance the work that they do. And also even receiving money from people in the diaspora to help within communities. We see that there are a lot of bureaucracies around movement of money. We also looked at some of the laws that sort of like hinder some of the work around maybe advancing human rights advocacy. In Zimbabwe, for instance, there is around the laws that we looked at, we also looked at a proposed private voluntary organization bill. So just to rewind a little bit, so for community foundations to operate, they either have to register as a trust or as a private voluntary organization in Zimbabwe. So most of the organizations and the study that we conducted, we noted that close to 90% of the organizations are registered as a trust because it's an easy way of registering, and there are less bureaucracies and there are less regulations to do with oversight on the organizations. But with the proposed bill now, organizations are supposed to register as a private voluntary organization, which is a bit of a lengthy process. And it also, the proposed bill suggests a lot of oversight and a lot of bureaucracies from the government side, which tends to affect the operations of community foundations. So the reason why we also looked at and zoned at community foundations is because of that appreciation of the work that they do, but also understanding that the broader policies and laws that affect civil society also tends to affect these organizations. But it is a proposed bill. It hasn't been passed. There have been consultations within communities around the bill. And today, when we look at advocating for an enabling environment, we also looked at what needs to be done for there to be an enabling environment for these organizations. So we looked at what organizations and communities need to do as a collective. They need to be telling their story and telling it right. They need to amplify community voices so that there is a broader appreciation of the work that they do, and also for them to advocate for an enabling environment. For them to reach out to the government, they need to come to the table and also present their important work so that also tilt in their favor. There is need for movement building. So for the past few months, we've been also working on movement building in Zimbabwe around community foundations. That is, as an organization, we've been trying to influence the formation of a network of community foundations for them to speak with one voice, for them to collaborate, for them to also avoid working in silos, and especially around advocating for an enabling environment. So this is what we've been doing as an organization to say, we need to strengthen the capacities of community foundations to advance their work, but also for them to have a voice, to also advocate, rather than us as a think tank to be advocating on their behalf. They should also speak on or for themselves. And also through this fellowship, I've managed to learn from others how they have actually handled it. I recall a few weeks ago, we were in Mozambique, where we were launching, where the Shift the Power movement was launching the Mozambican version of Shift the Power movement. And I learned quite a lot from the sessions that we had, especially around advocating for an enabling environment. Mozambique was part of the countries that we studied in our 10-country study. But I appreciated what one speaker said around how they've been able to talk to the government, how they've been able to advocate. They really emphasized on movement building. They really emphasized on collaboration. Knocking on the government doors alone doesn't really yield any results. But when they come together as a collective, I also learned that prior, there wasn't a policy or a framework that sort of like supported the formation of foundations in Mozambique. But because of a group of people that came together and thought, you know what, we need to form a foundation, we need to form philanthropic vehicles that also advance community philanthropy. They managed to then approach the government with persistence, and eventually there was a policy that then allows for the formation of philanthropic foundations. So this is what I've learned through the Shift the Power Fellowship, that it's important to learn from others, because sometimes you might think Zimbabwe is a special case and we're the only ones who are facing issues around the shrinking civic space. So having those learnings and also coming back home and saying, how best can we then put it into practice? How best can we mobilize community foundations to speak with one voice, to knock at the government doors in order to tilt the needle? So in a nutshell, that's what I can say I've learned. And in as much as you might say the fellowship has come to an end, I believe this is just the beginning, and there is continuous learning. And the good thing is we are now a network. We are now, we've created a fellowship, and it's easy for me to then call Gloria and say, Gloria, I need help with this and that. How did you handle it in Uganda, for example? And then we also adopt certain learnings so that we can advocate with one voice. Thank you, Essie.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I think, this question of, especially when we are addressing the shrinking civilization or foundations or institutions that may or may not be a question there, or at least an approach in how do we make sure that these institutions, these organizations are brought in into the overall conversation around what is different and how can they work differently and how can they make decisions together. So I think the report, I know there was also a report that you've referenced in Zimbabwe. We can make that available too to those who have registered for this call and to the wider community as well, or to the wider movement as well, around really what it takes to really what it takes to build that collective and collective effort and movement building. I'm going to turn next to Diane. I can't see her anymore. I don't know if she's in the room too. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you just say hi?
Hi.
Hi. There you are. I'm going to turn next to you and to just talk a little bit, I guess, just building from Shelley's conversation around working with organizations, around getting them registered, the legal frameworks. What has community engagement strategies look like for you in the communities you've worked with in Brazil?
Essie, I want to ask about permission because I prepared 5 beautiful pictures and I want to show you. If you can allow me to do that. So it's a small presentation.
Yeah. So let me make you a co-host.
You should be
So
able to
that-
share the slides.
Okay.
That's very good. All right. Here. It's for everybody.
I can see it.
Yeah. Okay. So, hi, everybody. Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Since we will talk about shift the power, then I will speak in my own language, which is Portuguese. So you have to turn on your interpretation to English. That's very good. I think my dear friend Florence will love that. So let's go. Ok, fui convidada para a gente conversar sobre engajamento comunitário, como as mudanças ocorrem. Tem uma coisa antes que eu queria falar com vocês, porque meu nome é Diane Pereira Souza, eu trabalho numa fundação comunitária no Brasil, e o Brasil é um lugar muito grande, né? Então, muitas pessoas conhecem o Brasil a partir de São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Bahia, mas o Brasil é um país muito grande, que tem uma grande diversidade cultural, econômica, social, e eu venho desse lugar aqui em vermelho, que se chama Maranhão, que fica na região norte do Brasil. E a gente é completamente diferente das pessoas de São Paulo, das pessoas do Rio, e aí quando eu falo completamente diferente a gente possui uma identidade própria, apesar da gente falar o mesmo idioma no Brasil, que é português, mas a gente tem muitas características diferentes. E isso é muito importante para a gente entender quando a gente fala sobre engajamento de comunidades e mudanças sociais de verdade. Como é que a gente conversa sobre mudança e engajamento da comunidade? Para a gente, só é possível fazer isso no trabalho que a gente faz a partir de uma filantropia comunitária. E aí, quando eu falo filantropia comunitária, eu estou falando de uma coisa muito importante, que está baseada em 3 elementos principais para a gente, que é pessoas, território e comunidade. Eu queria dizer para vocês que o que eu estou apresentando aqui, ele é fruto do que nós experimentamos, validamos e fazemos dentro da organização que eu trabalho. Ele não tem nenhuma base geral, ele tem uma base muito específica. Para a gente, as pessoas, elas conduzem, compartilham, experimentam e criam. O território é esse ambiente que produz conhecimento, ancestralidade e história. A comunidade é um espaço político, econômico e de solidariedade. Quando eu falo sobre filantropia comunitária, para mim, tem uma questão importante que eu não estou falando, quando eu falo de comunidade, em vizinhanças, em bairros, em cidades. Eu estou falando de um pequeno espaço geográfico que tem uma relação muito grande com o meio ambiente e que é desse espaço geográfico que brotam as alternativas de mudanças sociais que a gente está pensando. Então, para a gente, pessoas são importantes, territórios são os nossos laboratórios de aprendizagem e as comunidades são os espaços onde essas aprendizagens conseguem realmente acontecer. Para que a gente consiga engajar uma comunidade, a gente precisa de pessoas, de território e da própria comunidade. O que isso significa? Significa dizer que, quando a gente olha para a filantropia comunitária, o que a gente está querendo é transformar escassez em abundância. Mas para isso tem uma pergunta muito importante para ser feita. Qual que são as potências do nosso território? Porque a gente sempre está olhando as comunidades e os territórios a partir da escassez. A gente olha para as comunidades, olha para os territórios e acha que ali não tem nada, a gente acha que não existe. Mas as pessoas que moram nos territórios e nas comunidades, elas têm ciência, elas têm conhecimento, elas têm potencialidades. Então, a filantropia comunitária ajuda a gente identificar quais são as potencialidades do território. Uma coisa importante para a gente, as pessoas podem ser a solução. Então, quando a gente está pensando, por exemplo, em desenvolvimento, a gente não pensa em desenvolvimento do ponto de vista geral. Para a gente é importante pautar o desenvolvimento territorial. As pessoas, elas possuem ideias, os territórios possuem espaço para que essas ideias sejam materializadas, e o que a gente está fazendo é investindo em pessoas que conseguem transformar os seus territórios a partir de ideias individuais e coletivas. Mas aí tem uma coisa muito importante que a filantropia precisa fazer, que é entender que as comunidades possuem soluções reais para os desafios que a gente enfrenta hoje em dia no mundo. E aí tem uma coisa, para mim, que foi super importante de poder partilhar esse tempo dentro do fellowship da Global Fund com o Shift the Power, que é, para nós, antes de fazer Shift the Power, nós precisamos mostrar o poder, nós precisamos fazer Show the Power, que é o quê? Que é visibilizar todo o processo de desenvolvimento orgânico, territorial e comunitário que os territórios têm, e a partir disso, a partir de mostrar esse poder, de mostrar as soluções que brotam para os desafios locais, regionais e mundiais, aí sim a gente vai conseguir fazer o shift the power. Então, para mim, esse processo de participação dentro do fellowship me levou a ter esse tipo de reflexão sobre se nós não precisamos, antes de shift the power, antes de mudar o poder, antes de pensar nessa categoria de mudança de poder, então, abrir um espaço para poder mostrar o poder, e poder aqui eu estou falando participação, visibilidade, soluções reais que comunidades, grupos de jovens, territórios conseguem endereçar, conseguem realizar, que também servem como soluções para a igualdade, para a justiça social em todo o mundo. Então, é isso. Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful presentation, Dan. Thank you. As you were talking, it reminded me, hold on, let me just put on my video. I was trying to save bandwidth. It reminded me of parts of the conversation we had this morning, which was that, communities already have power. And I think that mindset shift that you talked about, or that needs to happen first. We have been, I guess the current system as it has been designed, it will always as operate from a space of scarcity that we don't have, that we are lacking, that we need capacity, that we need something in order to actually step forward. But when you flip that prescription, or when you have a different perspective and ask a different question, you do realize that power already is there. And again, like you mentioned, this is also a conversation about understanding and acknowledging the different power dynamics that already exist within us, starting with ourselves. So thank you so much for that presentation. I really loved it. I guess continuing this sort of conversation on what it looks like in terms of frameworks, example I'm going to turn now to Angela. Actually, then some policies were directly with institutions in Colombia. So I don't see her screen anymore. At least I don't see her video. Are you still on? Why can't I see you anymore?
I'm here. I'm here.
Hi, there you are. So good morning. You now have the microphone. Over to you.
Thank you, Essie. Thank you, Shelly and Diane. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you was more like a journey, because for me, the fellowship started as an opportunity to think about what systems perspective could bring to our conversations around shifting power. That was actually a very conceptual question for me at that moment, but it ended up being an opportunity to engage into a lot of activities and dialogues with different people and perspective, and to find a network that turned that question into something more concrete and practical, I will say. So when we think about how change happens, sometimes, especially when we are in these spaces where we gather and find things in common, we it happens very often that we find ourselves and hear others pointing out and blaming on the problem outside our system, our group, ourselves. And that way to express what is problematic about the system in which we live in is that it takes power away from us, as Diane was saying. Like, we end up blaming others, but we don't have the power to change anyone. In fact, from a systems perspective, we don't have the power to change a system. Each one of us can only contribute to move it, to poke it, to maybe push it a little bit towards something that we like it better than where we are, but we cannot control how it changes. So long time ago, I was working in the education sector, and I always found those teachers that were saying okay, we want to create critic citizenships. We want to create empowered citizens. And they are all dreaming about these young people empowered with a lot of senses of agency, defying a lot of the things that they found very problematic for the youth. And at the same time, when I was working with them inside the classrooms, they were doing exactly the opposite. They were asking kids and young people how to behave exactly in the same way as they were expecting them to do. They were creating a lot of rules to prohibit how things should be things should be done, and they were practicing and moving under this structure that was created exactly to do the opposite. It was a system or it is still a system that ends up producing obedience and ends up producing a sense of I cannot change anything. Like the structure, the system in which I live is bigger than and I don't have a place to change. So decades after that experience, I started working with organizations and in a business school, and I was doing consultancy for huge companies, private companies wanting to do cultural transformation. And then the pattern repeated again. People, managers, CEOs wanted to have vibrant, creative cultures inside their organizations. But what they were doing to supposedly promote that creativity and innovation and well-being was creating rules, creating punishments, and creating, in the best scenarios, they were creating competition within their employees. So more recently, I started working in the peace building field. And it was quite shocking that even if we were declaring that we were trying to create peace, what we were actually doing was, again, creating a lot of processes that were imposing the meaning of peace, the meaning of well-being, and the solutions to communities where the people, even they had never been there before those projects arrived. So me thinking about this, like what systems can bring to us, and when we are talking about shift the power, was very obvious. It was like, if we don't understand and take this seriously, that we cannot control change and that we cannot change anyone else outside ourselves, and if we don't understand that in the only way in which humans change is actually in our co-living, in our relationships, like dancing one with the other, then we will keep repeating these structures. So that's where the fellowship appeared as an opportunity to start talking and taking this seriously about our architectures and our structures inside the social sector. This is not new, but this is something that is not researched or like taken into account seriously enough. And it is that what we have been doing in the philanthropic sector, in the social sector, in the international cooperation sector, and also sometimes inside the local based organizations, is that we are copying architectures and management logics and dynamics that come from the capitalist enterprise world, and we are using those structures without even think about the logics that are underneath those. That's how we find ourselves in a system that promotes competition, that punish mistakes, and that thinks that transformation is a linear thing that we can plan and control. During these days in the fellowship, what I have been doing for months is to explore with others, how can we do things together, decide what we want to do together, and coordinate actions together under logics that put at the center what we really care about, under logics that create a system in coherence with the transformations that we want. So that recognize that there is always a human being there, a complete circular human being with emotions, with relationships, with family, and that is struggling with a lot of things. And how can we actually move from that recognition that it's very complex and challenging towards a system that allowed us to make decisions and put that recognition into practice. I've been learning mostly during this process, and also gathering stories about how we can do that in different levels. And that's how I also find a group of peers that works under governance, and to restate the meaning of governance, not only as a board or as a group that makes decisions, but also as people that is reflecting about the spoken and unspoken agreements in which we organize ourselves and create collective action. I don't have an answer of a perfect structure or architecture, but I do know that we have a lot of stories within our network that we can make more visible. And I think that that's the next challenge that we have, make them visible and share. How are we resolving these challenges? How are we making decisions, putting people at the center, putting relationships and emotions at the center? And so far, I have found that participative adaptive governances, understood as ways to coordinate things between humans, could be a way to find some principles coherent with what we are envisioning in this shift of power movement. Sometimes when I talk about this, a lot of people think that we might be, or I might be, naive, because sometimes people are not wanting to accept that they cannot control, or that they feel that they might lose power if we create architectures that are not hierarchical, or they think that we might lose effectivity or efficiency or efficacy, because those are the words that are at the center now of our governance structure. But I do believe that is more about being irreverente. I don't know if someone can help me with that. Irreverent, define? Wendy.
Irreverent.
Irreverent? Okay, thank you. And brave enough to move from the theory, from the concept to the practice in an everyday basis, on an everyday lives. And I wouldn't been able to do that if the fellowship wouldn't offer me, for example, a small amount of money and a lot of space and a safe place to think about this, to dream about it, and to stop worrying about how crazy or difficult it sounded. So I would like to close with that, because I think that the fellowship was like a bet, a little bit of a push maybe to jump into and connect with more. I have been exploring these conversations with more than 50 people, found a lot of interest, possibilities, learnings. And this was just like a way of managing things, of governance, of doing things together that was different. For sure, we can make it better, yeah. But it was just like a bet, a small gesture that create trust and new ways of coordinate things together. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Beautiful, Angela. Thank you so much. As you were talking, it reminded me of two sort of recurring themes that came up in the final reports of the fellows at the end of their tenure with us, which was one around new ways of working, and then two, what the fellowship really afforded them to do, which was the power of reflection, just having a container or a space to ask questions out loud, to pilot, to question, to experiment. In sort of thinking around new ways of working, this was really the idea of shaking off old assumptions and reimagining what the new could look like. Like you said, giving you the time to sort of dream collectively with one another and with the communities that you are working with. It was also about looking at power relations from a more focused perspective on local context. So leveling the playing field, rethinking what risk looks like. And I think that came up in your presentation, in your talk about, the risk. And then on the other side of it is also fear of letting go of power or giving away power and what that looks like. So I think, those were the two things that popped up for me as you were speaking. So thank you again for your presentation. It's still, I think as another speaker said earlier in the morning, this is still an evolving process, and we don't pretend to have answers to many of the questions that the fellows grappled with over the last 10 months. It was really, like I said, a space to just begin to pilot and experiment and sort of build the body of knowledge, the body of evidence around what change looks like and how you can do it. I think one of the initial sort of at least requests sometimes that we get is, can you give me a 10-point checklist on shifting power? If I do these 10 things, then I have shifted power. And it simply doesn't work that way. You know, it's as Diane mentioned, it is a mindset change. You need to sort of really embody the values and the principles that are described in the Shift of Power Manifesto, in the way that you work in, really sort of unpacking a lot of those things. There isn't a checklist that we can give you that, that says, you do these things, 5 things, 10 things, 15 things, and automatically you are in the new world and you have shifted power. It isn't, it is unfortunately or fortunately more complicated than that. So we're gonna probably spend the next 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes left. And we're gonna do a breakout room. I have tried to rearrange the interpreters into 2 rooms, so we'll see how this works. Welcome back, welcome back. Hi, how was that? I was sitting all by my lonesome. Well, Ashman was there, but he wasn't talking to me. So it was just me by my lonesome. So I am really curious to see or hear what came up in your conversations. We have about maybe 7 more minutes left of our time together this morning or this afternoon. I have a couple of announcements, but I don't know who wants to kick us off on what came up in your various rooms and conversations that you'd like to share. And then I'll hand it back to our 3 speakers for any final last words. Who would like to go first?
And Madonna can go first.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, so we were in the room talking about community foundations and the legal framework. So one of the things we had an intensive discussion around was, is it even necessary to have community foundations registered? Should we impose legal regulations on them, seeing as they are community-based? So out of our discussions, the answers were both yes and no. Because one of the things is that some community foundations need to access external funding, and that will require that they are registered. So all around compliance issues. Then of course, some donors want to fund foundations that are actually registered. It's a trust issue. They wouldn't trust something that is not registered, so they would prefer that there's some legal status to read. And we also discussed that it also gives the community foundation legitimacy if it's registered, especially to the outside. But one of the things we did talk about was around that, in as much as we can neither agree nor disagree to have the community foundations registered, but it is important that we need to seek innovative ways of ensuring that the community foundations can still be able to function in their true space as community foundations. So we should become innovative in terms of how we work with the community foundations and how we help them, but then also how we become part of the community foundations. So I'll allow Madonna to add something, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to supplement what Rachel mentioned, we reflected on how the fellowship has shaped advocacy for enabling environment in our different contexts. And one of the things that emerged was the acknowledgement that the precondition for trust for grant makers in the development and philanthropy space is heavily dependent on registration, and it's really up to the community foundation leaders and the ecosystems within which they operate to decide whether or not they play the game. So how much are you willing to lose? And if you decide to play the game, there have been instances of being very intentional about the legal support that you get around innovative registration, because for many contexts, community foundations are not necessarily recognized for their uniqueness to other civil society or development structures. So you have to get innovative or adopt adaptative registration. And all of this is to ensure that the registration enables the community foundation to operate in the most feasible, most relevant way to their context, the scope of work, and the needs of their community. And it was also important to emphasize that registration doesn't stop efforts of pursuing community buy-in of the community foundations. While it's one step to getting the buy-in and the legitimacy that you need to get international funding, it shouldn't be the end to pursuing community buy-in for you to be able to impact and work well with the community to advance their needs and raise resources and gain their trust as well in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps another question that could be asked with that is how do you build trust? You know, I think that's also another side of the coin, or another part of or other questions to ask is how do you build trust and how do you mitigate that risk, right, of not being registered or registered? Thank you so much. Who else would like to go for the next group?
I can go.
Yes, please go ahead. Hi, Gloria.
Hi, Essie. In the interest of time, I will really try to keep it very brief. So in our group, we're discussing decolonizing aid and alternatives and what that looks like. And what stood out for us really was the fact that we need to acknowledge that the fact that already the shifting the power has been happening and community have been leading themselves. And sometimes the language when it comes, especially around decolonizing, it does seem like there already isn't change that is happening, or communities aren't responding to their own problems. A case in point was around COVID, when someone mentioned the example of the World Bank and IMF and how they responded globally, but it turned out for the most part in the global South, they really did not respond. And that is like just with like other, institutions, philanthropic or otherwise, most of the times it's communities that are their first responders to their own problems using their own solutions. We've seen, communities, women in Africa and in Latin America and in the global South come together to collect funds to be able to take care of, their family and fund their education for their children, fund their health. So this idea that we're waiting for somebody to come and like tell us how to decolonize the work that we're doing, we found that it was problematic, and even the language sometimes in and of itself is also problematic. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And also think about like the alternatives that we are seeking and looking for are already within the communities. And it's very, very political to listen and work with the communities wherever we're coming from, because those are the alternatives that are existing. And sometimes it's hard to think about alternatives if you're outside of that community. So just being part of the community, moving and listening with the community to what they're doing and how they're doing it and honoring that. It's really, really critical. Yeah. If anyone, Laura or my other group mates would like to add, please go ahead. Thank you.
I'm saying claps, so that means no. I think this idea of decolonizing aid, so it came up a couple of weeks ago at the African Philanthropy Conference about, if we think about the true sense of community philanthropy, African Ubuntu, the principle or the idea that I am because of you, and that, just like you rightly said, that we take care of each other anyway. We know how to do that automatically. So is this idea of decolonizing aid really for us, because we've always been doing this type of work, especially within Africa and especially in the global South. Maybe it is about making the invisible visible, just showing what is already there. So that's probably the strategy, or at least one approach to that. Any other last words? There was another group, I believe. I don't know if we have. Maybe you can take 3 more minutes till close. We're already at time, and I want to be respectful and give you back your time. But maybe last few words. I don't know if the 3 speakers, if Angela, Diane, or Shelley would like to just say a few words to close us off.
Yes,
Or if you've exhausted it all. Okay, go ahead, Diane.
I just want to say something because we have a famous activist in Brazil. They call Ayrton Krenak, and they write a book they call Ideas for Postpone the End of the World. And we right now was the youngs building a book that call Good Practice to Postpone the End of the World. It's about an answer about the ideas, ideas and good practices. This happiness because of the fellowship, and this good practice comes from the communities. So it's about how the communities, for example, will address or approach the problems with children's they are not in the school, or the problems that we have with the environment in the specific practices that they have, and they put in the book and they say, wow, it's our solution. So I think this is part of our discussion about decolonizing development, and also how can we talk about the power in a good way to transform realities and to make highlights in this whole process. So for this, thank you very much for everyone that come here and show that have interest in this discussion. And yes, it is. Thank you, Essint, for the whole process and for everything that you do with us in this 10 months in the fellowship.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I can't wait to get my hand on that, like how to end the world, or how to prevent the end of the world. I think it's really powerful. So thank you so much. I don't know. I wanted to just make an announcement that this was the second cohort of Shift to Power Fellows, and we do plan to have a third cohort of fellows in the month of September. Towards the end of September, early October, we will be making another call for the third cohort of Shift to Power Fellows. That again will run another 10 months into 2025. So for all of you who have registered for this call and the call in the morning, we will keep you updated on when the call for applications is open. But in the meantime, if there are questions about how the fellowship went or processes, please let me know, or that any of my colleagues, Wendy and Eshman, are also here. But you also have the other fellows as well as points of contact if you need to reach them directly to ask about how the fellowship went. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for being gracious to stay a few minutes past our official time. I hope that the conversations in the breakout room was useful. And like I said, we didn't try to attempt to answer or solve the problems of the current broken system. But we wanted to at least use this as a teaser, as a beginning conversation to just showcase some of the practices and thinking that the fellows have spent the last 10 months working on. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day, evening, and week. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Essie. Bye.
Essie. Bye, everybody.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.